Hello and welcome back. I'm Jeff Claridge. This is the Jazz Clarinet Agenda. And this is about Benny Goodman. I think this is episode 3. I have done this episode at least 3 or 4 times, and one of the times I've recorded it was 37 minutes long. I have so much to talk about with Benny Goodman, but I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible. I have changed every single song I wanted to use as an example. How this is going to work is I'm not going to play any of the music for you. Below, in the description, are going to be some links. You can check them out. They'll take you to certain recordings on YouTube, and I'm going to talk about those recordings. So you can pause this video, watch them one at a time, and then listen to what I have to say about them, or the other way around. I can talk about them, whatever you prefer. But I find that's the easiest, fastest, most efficient thing for these videos. So initially, I wanted to have a list of like 10 for Benny Goodman because there's so many different artists, there's so many different composers and arrangers who, in my mind, really encapsulate what he is, like really what his style is. But I'm simplifying it to just 3. Hopefully, these 3 inspire you to go further. Immediately, like it's not a complete list. You're missing so much. Anyways. So the 3 songs I want you to check out, if you're at all interested in Benny Goodman, is a live recording from 1937, I think September 20-something, featuring Benny Goodman, Teddy Wilson, Lionel Hampton, and Gene Krupa, called Runnin' Wild. It's one of my favorite recordings. It's one of the recordings that got me into Benny Goodman in the first place. So this is the Benny Goodman Quartet. It's the band that kind of broke the racial barrier. At least they're not the first band necessarily that had black and white musicians in the 30s, but they are the most popular. Benny, at the height of the swing era, he was the most popular musician at the time. The band doing the best. Suddenly decided to add a black musician in a time where there was so much racial segregation that like entire states would like basically riot if you did that. Benny managed to do this, hiring Teddy Wilson. And then Lionel Hampton about a year later, I think 1935 and then 1936 for Lionel Hampton. So this is a quartet with 2 white musicians and 2 black musicians. And they are just so exciting and so fun. The music is so joyous. What Benny Goodman means to me is just joy. Just happy music, exciting music. And there's so many eras of his playing. My favorite music to check out really is 1937 to 38, this period with this quartet, but also the orchestra at the time. But 1941 to 42, when Charlie Christian and Cootie Williams were part of the band. And then you can argue the late 40s but never mind. And 1960 with Red Norvo. Red Norvo was around for a few years, but that band specifically I really like. No matter what the year is, Benny does play a little bit differently. He uses different clarinets depending whether it's a live recording or a studio recording, at least in his heyday in the 30s. But his swing feel is always present. His sound is wonderful. It's a lot more old school at the same time. And I don't even play like that. Benny is my favorite musician. My favorite sound of his is probably 1945. There's a few broadcasts of that where you can hear his sound really nice there. Um, he uses weak reeds, like strength one, his entire career. And he encapsulated basically all the clarinetists and all their techniques, their styles that came before him in the 20s, and not only could play that, but added something more. He also took, I think the biggest thing that he did was taking Louis Armstrong, this trumpet player, who's one of the most important figures in jazz, taking the way that Louis Armstrong plays in solos and bringing it to the clarinet. He didn't just bring it to the clarinet, he brought it to his own quartet. And what you're hearing on this recording of Running Wild is basically Benny is playing the trumpet part in a trad jazz setting. Benny is the trumpet player. Lionel Hampton is the clarinet player playing the higher lines. And Teddy Wilson on piano, without a bass player, is doing both the tuba part in his left hand and kind of the trombone part in his right hand. There's so much opportunity to do that. There's so many things they can do. What Teddy Wilson does especially is he basically never plays the song the same. How jazz works is there's a form and it keeps repeating. Teddy Wilson will change what he plays over the form every single time. I mean the harmonic, like what is going on harmonically underneath it. The bass line, he'll change anything he feels like because he has that power. Lionel Hampton is more of a drummer. You have a band also which basically in my mind features the first rock drummer. Gene Krupa never played rock, but the way he played and the way he added energy and like put a spotlight on the drums really paved the way for rock music as it happened, as far as I'm concerned. There was nothing else like it in terms of the energy and enthusiasm that band could generate. The next song I want you to check out, though, is it was a song from, I think, 1935 that was originally a Fletcher Henderson song from earlier, that may have also been arranged earlier by Don Redman or Horace Henderson, but then rearranged by Fletcher Henderson for his second band, that was then kind of rearranged to add Benny Goodman for Benny's band when Fletcher's second band died. Too much information. This is the recording 20 years later, 1956, I think, on the Benny Goodman story, featuring like a stacked alumni band of Benny Goodman's finest musicians. Basically all of his best except Ziggy Yeoman, who was in the movie. There's a song for the movie, but he wasn't playing at the time. Other than that, it's like the best they could be. And there's lots of songs from this era for the movie. I don't like the way that Benny's playing over it. He's not necessarily the most inspired for his own movie, which is kind of sad. But everyone else on this album, the track, is so good. Stan Getz has some amazing solos, but not in this specific version of Down South Camp Meeting. Yeah, I have to show you Fletcher Henderson if I show you Benny Goodman, and that's a really good version of that song in really good sound quality that I think as a young student you might appreciate. Lastly, Benny Goodman gets a bad rap from a lot of people, and part of that is because he was so single-mindedly focused on the clarinet. He was basically out to lunch like with anyone around him. He'd call everyone Pops. Pops was initially a reference to Louis Armstrong, but he would just, hey Pops, like hey man, but hey Pops. He called his wife that. He called everyone. He was just so just not quite caring of other people. He's not very mindful. He was just so laser focused on the clarinet. But how he was focused also changed. People who you may see now, who might have played with or knew Benny Goodman, almost all of them would have seen him live or played with him live, like from between the 60s and the 80s. And I don't think that's his heyday. Most of that I don't really listen to. And part of the reason why is because in the same way as Miles Davis like was quoted, I think in one of his books, as saying he didn't practice. He stopped practicing with the exception of his second great quintet when he was playing with Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams. Other than that, like that band forced Miles to actually have to practice. It was so groundbreaking. It was doing so much that Miles felt he had to practice. Benny didn't stop practicing, but basically from kind of the 50s onwards, he didn't practice jazz. This is what his daughter said in an interview on for PBS for this documentary in 1991. Um, he'd practice even he'd do a concert, like a classical concert, and then he would come home and immediately start practicing in like the study of their house. Um, but from the 50s onwards, he was basically just practicing classical music. He stopped like trying to improve as a jazz musician, but he was so focused on being recognized as an amazing classical player. Um, Benny didn't just take everything that came before him and added his own take on it, but he brought a classical mentality to it and to jazz. Teddy Wilson's playing was also very classical sounding. Sounds very sophisticated. Benny didn't. The thing about Benny that a lot of other people might tell you is that he's not as good as Artie Shaw in the sense that all of his solos aren't necessarily as worthwhile to transcribe. If you pick apart his solo note for note and what he plays, it's not as interesting. And I understand that. Part of that is that he's getting the general idea of the harmony of the form, and he's not really outlining all these subdominant chords. If you don't know what those are, well, you'll find out someday. He's just kind of playing. He's more interested in the feel and the energy. He may not have even known the chord changes of some songs. Jess Stacy was saying at some point that when Benny asked to hear the changes, he asked Jess to just play through the entire form. And Benny would just hear it once and like, oh yeah, I got it. So I think he simplified things as well. Anyways, his playing doesn't necessarily stand up to the test of time that way because he's simplifying the chords a whole lot more than even Artie Shaw did. And you can't hear exactly what he's doing. But the best thing about him, in terms of the music that I like listening to of his, isn't even necessarily Benny's own playing. There's always a spot for the clarinet. But the musicianship he can get out of everyone else, and everyone else might not have liked him, but he gets the best out of, basically, in my mind, Gene Krupa's best playing was with Benny. Lionel Hampton's best playing might have been with other people because he kept improving through the 50s, had so much more bebop technique. Teddy Wilson's best playing was probably with Benny. Charlie Christian died early. Cootie Williams, not necessarily, but anyways, because he did so much, but he had really iconic stuff with Benny. For whatever reason, Benny could take all these amazing musicians and get the most out of them. And the recordings themselves are all, in my mind, the most exciting and the most inspiring. There's so much to listen to. There's so much jazz history. And he basically played with everyone. Basically. Not Miles Davis, but basically everyone else at some point. And, yeah, what he can bring in terms of an energy of the band. He plays what is right for the ensemble, to build with the ensemble, especially when you're hearing takes where he's not necessarily trying to go for it. He's just trying to get the rest of the band into it and playing more. Yeah. So the last song I wanted to show you is a commission he asked Aaron Copland, who's an amazing classical composer, to compose for him. And it's become one of the staples of the classical clarinet world. Benny Goodman's one of those few musicians who is recognized, if not highly regarded, in the classical music community as well. Benny played the premier version of a lot of songs because he commissioned them. And his classical playing is not everyone's favorite, but the fact that he kind of stands up on both different genres at the same time was really important to him, and it was a constant pursuit of his. He was always trying to improve himself. So, this is one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard by Aaron Copland, and it showcases a lot. It's gorgeous at the beginning, and then it takes things in ways that Benny can't really do in jazz music. Kind of with Eddie Sauter, but not exactly. So hopefully these three songs show you exactly what he's capable of. And how he's always trying to improve, because it's not perfect. Yeah. So thank you very much.